His mother, of course. What happened here is his mother, 3 weeks later, miraculously finds her kids, Moira.
Shows up.
It was an amazing story. And once she finds the kids, she's thrilled to find the kids, shocked to find out that her husband's dead. Long story here. For 6 months, she lay in bed very sick with malaria, because she got malaria, something terribly. And then my daddy, who's now 5, and his older brother, who's 12, they become the breadwinners of the family. Now remember, I'm a little kid sitting in that down comforter hearing these stories. And my daddy says, kids, we had to go beg for food. We were stunned. He said, for 6 months, I begged for food, and people would give us food with bread with hairy green hair all over it. It was
moldy bread.
Yeah, moldy bread, and they had terrible tummy aches. For 6 months, he did this, Moira. I mean, we were stunned to hear this as little kids. And then my daddy says, I'll never forget, I was standing next to my mother's bedside with my 2 sisters. My brother was finding food when I heard her final words. And then she said, how can I leave you like this? Kids closed their eyes and died. This time, he said, when they took me to that field, I suddenly realized what that hole was about. And I yelled and screamed, don't put my mommy into that hole. Moira, this is all background to my daddy's story, because my daddy's story starts right here. It's a story of a little 5-year-old orphan boy left in a strange country called China.
The first picture we want you to see represents the surrogate parents now, after both mom and dad have died. Tell us who we're seeing here.
That's my father on the extreme right there. That's his brother, older brother, Misha, in the middle in the back. That's his sister, Marusia, on the left. And right in the front, that's Babusia and Dieda. That would be his uncle and aunt. That would be his father's brother. That would be the one who led his father to Jesus. And the one on the right in the front, that would be my great-grandfather. That's my grandfather's father. It's a phenomenal picture. And that would be a picture as well. My dad is on the extreme right in the back, and that's my uncle Misha on the left there in the back, and Marusia is in the front in the dark.
These siblings would be separated ultimately, all going to try and survive. Here is the young man, Vanya.
That would be my dad already in Shanghai.
One of the most disturbing chapters is where your dad is working on a chicken farm. He didn't have shoes. I don't know at what age he ever got a pair of shoes.
Well, that's a good story. As a matter of fact, he became a cobbler probably because of that. But he was 5 years old. His older siblings were able to work, so other families snatched them up very quickly. But he was an extra mouth to feed. Everybody was very poor. And the pastor would ask people, please, somebody take Vanya, but nobody would take him because they were very poor. There was a couple who came across from Russia with this group. They now were living about 150 kilometers away. They hear that there's orphans in the big city, so she sends her husband to the big city, find me a little orphan girl. So he tells the pastor, I hear you have orphans. Yes, we do. We'd like a little girl. We don't have a little girl. We just have 5-year-old Vanya. So he says, that's okay, I'll take him. So it takes him 5 days to get back to his new home on a horse and a wagon. My daddy begins calling this man Papa. He can't wait to meet his new mother. When he finally meets her, he's thinking, why is she so mean looking? When she meets him for the first time, she looks at her and says, why did you bring me this dog? She says to her husband. That's the first words that he hears coming out of her mouth. For 4.5 years, he lived with this lady. Her name was Masha. And Moira, they were 4.5 years of hell on earth.
Absolute child abuse, regular beatings. Tell what she did with the hens. Well, stealing the hens.
Yes, she had this chicken coop. My daddy was 5 years old. He lived there for 4.5 years. She gave him a chore. Every evening, she'd figure out how many eggs should be laid, and then she would tell him, tomorrow she'd find 15 eggs. He'd go out and scour the barn. He'd find 13. And she would count. She'd scream and yell, you lost these eggs. She would beat him viciously for not finding those eggs. And we would ask our daddy, Daddy, this is not right, this is not fair that she treated you like this. Now, when my daddy was telling us this story, he thought she was still alive living in Australia. We later on found out she died in China. But we didn't know that. This is why it's important. Because I remember telling my daddy, Daddy, you tell us where she lives. We'll get on the next airplane, go to Australia, karate chop her to death, blow her house up. And, you know, my daddy at that point could have destroyed our lives by planting seeds of bitterness. But my daddy would start weeping. Kids, don't think evil of Masha. I know she mistreated me. But if I were to meet her today, I'd thank her because at least she was willing to take care of a little orphan boy. And I tell people, please plant seeds of gratefulness into the tender virgin hearts of your children, just the way my daddy did.
This is the neighbor who rescued you many times by giving you those few extra eggs to bring it up to the quota that this woman had counted on.
I love you, Moira. You're making me out to be my daddy again because you said
did I
rescued
say that?
me. I love
See?
that. That's wonderful.
Your
yes.
father.
My daddy would tell us he'd come out of the barn and he's weeping because she said 16 eggs and he only found 13. And there was a neighbor lady one day that said, "Come over here." And she said, "Why are you crying?" "Well, I was looking for the eggs and I couldn't find any and she's going to beat me and I know how she beats you. It's not right." She said, "Don't leave. I'm going to come right back." She would give my daddy eggs. And she said, "Don't tell Masha I gave them to you." And she did this for 4.5 years. She literally became my daddy's savior. And do you know, years later, I would go to Australia with my wife, where she lived for many years, speaking in a church, and I would meet this lady. I went to her home just for happen chance, and she tells me that she would be the lady that gave those eggs to my daddy. And I would hug her. I thanked her for taking care of my daddy.
Can you say her name?
Boy. Her name was Dushaika. Dushaika.
Demchenko.
Yeah, Demchenko. Wonderful, wonderful lady. By the way, when my daddy lived at this particular home, one of his closest friends during this horrible time in his life became Dark Corners, because at least in a dark corner nobody would beat him. And I would ask him, "Daddy, what would you do when you get up off of your knees after she would beat you?" He would say, "I'd run back into that barn, fall on my knees, and pour my heart out to Jesus." I would say, "Daddy, why didn't you get bitter at Jesus?" He would say, "Son, why would I get bitter at Jesus? He was my closest friend. He was my daddy." And more, this is the whole point of the book. I have no time to tell you more of the book.
It truly is an epic tale.
Well, because during the story of the book, he was almost going to be shot at the firing squad. He almost died of a ruptured appendix. God healed him. Phenomenal. But this story affected my life, and it transformed my life. And I'd like to tell people, listen, I know you may have gone through some hell in your particular life, but as you read this book, you realize if God can do this in a little boy's life, like Vanya's life, maybe he can do the same in our life as well.
Our next picture is a very special one. I think the woman in this picture has a lot to do with why your dad was finally able to stop depending on dark corners.
Yes, yes, that's my lovely mother. That's such a lovely picture. That's exactly the way my mom and dad look today. My dad is a man of faith. My dad is a very simple man. He's a very humble man. When I was writing this book, he said to me, "Son, do not exaggerate." And when I finished writing the book, he gave me the greatest endorsement when he said, "You didn't exaggerate at all." And I just want to mention here in the last minute that I have, Johnny Erickson Tata and I met together. I shared the story with her. She was so touched with my daddy's story. She said, "Peter, when you're done, could I do your forward?" She's one of my heroes, and I'm so grateful that she did this.
We have a photograph of you presenting the published book to your dad. How precious is that?
I love him. I wrote this book for my children. If anybody else wants to read it, God bless you. But I know that God can use it in many people's lives.
Nice to know your mom and dad live near you in Oregon.
Yes, yes.
And www.outofthefarcorners.com. If you think you have something to complain about today, you need to read this book and see a triumphant faith where you find it hard to imagine it surviving, actually.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you for writing this, Peter.
You're very welcome.
And for sharing these moments with us.
Thank you very much.
We'll be right back.